Awesome. All right. Welcome again to I Got You podcast. My name is Renee, and I'm here with my co-host, Heather. And today we have two phenomenal guests who they were on the last show we had, and we thought the conversation was very engaging, so we wanted to invite them back to our show. We have Dr. Adrian A. Gentry, who is, again, a speaker and coach and an investor, and Pastor Wesley Johnson, who is a pastor and founder of a church in Connecticut. And he's also a founder of the J6 Enterprises LLC, which is an education and social impact consulting, coaching, and training company. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
No problem. All right. So I have a few questions for you. And one, we're gonna get right into it. And this is a very sensitive question, so I want to make sure that I contextualize it in the standpoint of this is a conversation. We're not trying to offend anyone, and we're trying to be very sensitive to what has recently happened in our news. But with that said, I have a question for everyone. So in light of the recent killings of our Black men, like George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, do you think Black men in general are cursed? Anyone can take that.
I would ask, my initial response is, heck no, and that's being nice.
Right.
But I would love for you to provide some context to that question. When you say cursed, what do you mean?
I think, well, this is my personal opinion now, okay? So looking at history and looking at how Black men have been treated, number one. Also looking at the standpoint of Black men as it relates to families and not being present because of whatever societal or systemic issues that may pose an issue to Black men. I feel like in general, they're placed in a position where they're not in an advantageous place. So with that said, and with the recent occurrences of issues in the media, police shootings, violence against Black men, but particularly Black women too, but particularly Black men. That's where I wanted to get the perspective. And this is more of probably a spiritual question, and I'm not quite sure if everyone is going to get it, but I think that's kind of where I'm coming from with the question.
Well, I would say emphatically no. I think inherent in your question provide some answers. Systematic oppression is real. Systemic racism is real. White supremacy is real. And African-American males, the African-American family, but particularly the African-American male, is a direct result of some of those of white supremacy and racism. So is he cursed? I would say no. Is he a victim of a system where he's been mistreated, misrepresented, mischaracterized? Yes, absolutely. And has that produced some dysfunction, some level of insecurity? Absolutely. But cursed, I would say no.
Awesome. Dr. Gentry?
Why would you ask me? I want to go behind him.
Doc, I'm waiting to hear you, man.
And this whole, I guess, 8 to 10 days of how many deaths that have happened. And I want to, I guess, expound on what you said as far as curse. And you said one from a spiritual level. Absolutely, we're not cursed from a spiritual level, right? We can't say that being the children of Israel. However, I once read a book by Booker T. Washington. It's called The Negro Problem. And in The Negro Problem, he outlines, he says, both whites and blacks were cursed due to slavery. And said one believed that they were superior and made the other one believe they were inferior. So with that deficit in both of our minds, we're dealing with a society now where African Americans are beginning to they're beginning to step out and really have money, have property. have power in their own community, which makes the other half fearful of what we have. So I don't believe we're cursed in regards of, from a spiritual standpoint, but I do believe emotionally and mentally we have been cursed, because I believe a lot of these things are coming from that power struggle that is going on inside of the African American and the white man. So in this fighting, in this frustration, in the emotion that I'm seeing laid out right now in Minneapolis, it's from that feeling of being inferior and being punished with your foot on your neck, on our necks, that they're lashing out. And I think even looking at the last man in his eyes, you can tell there was a power struggle. They're telling me to do something, and I refuse to do it. And it was senseless that this man had to die in the manner that he did die. But I think we're really dealing with that internal power struggle between races right now. And the only way, out of fear of losing their position or footing, is to react in the way they're reacting.
If I could add very quickly to that, thank you, Doc. I appreciate that. Good insight. I would say, I believe it was Dr. A.R. Bernard, a phenomenal, brilliant pastor in a Christian Cultural Center in New York City, who says, and I'm paraphrasing, "He who defines the language controls the conversation." And so I think we have been following and ascribing to a narrative and terminology that has not served us well, right? And so I think we have to begin to self-define. I think we have to do some real honest self-reflection and self-assessment, but we also have to begin to self-define, because I think oftentimes we play by the rules of those who've been cruel. We are always on the short end of the stick, right? And so again,
Absolutely.
These kind of things transpire. We allow space to say, well, what did he do? Let's get all of the facts. We don't have all of the information. What we do have is that another human being was senselessly killed. What we do know is that another human being was unarmed, right? What we do know is that another human being lost his or her life. And so the reality of it is, where is the empathy while you're waiting for whatever facts that you need? And I think we have to just kind of be cautious, careful, and intentional of the language that we use, because we can further the damage that has already been done through this process that one author called PTSS, post-traumatic slave syndrome. Yeah. And so I think we have to be careful of the language that we use, lest we continue to live into a narrative that's not true.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. So changing gears, and this conversation is very random, but thank you guys for that insight. I think that was very important. I think people needed to hear that.
Sure.
Okay, so in the Bible, there are multiple examples of men assuming many wives. Why is that not acceptable today for a man or a woman to assume multiple spouses?
Because y'all crazy. Why would I want to do that?
I'm just there for the doc. That's it.
Look, I'm just trying to get to the 26, like Pastor Wesley over there. Just one. I don't need 2, 3, 4. Golly. And I think it's an interesting question, because I think in certain churches it's not accepted anymore. Right? It's not a practice. And we look at the Mormons and we look at different churches, they do still accept multiple wives. But then we also have a question, are we talking about New Testament or Old Testament after Paul set up a new church? So when in the Old Testament, yes, it was permissible and it was common, but we didn't see it so much in the New Testament, which when Paul set up the new rules, I believe that one was phased out to have multiple wives. Now we're looking more towards loyalty, because Paul realized that people were killing people because their wife was talking too much. But I don't know. That was another chapter. Y'all missed that one. But but I think that's really why it's not accepted. We still look at the Muslim culture. They still have that same understanding that they will carry multiple wives as long as they can support each of them. I think support each of them, if I'm not mistaken, in the same manner. Polygamists, they still deal with that out in Utah. Really, really, really big. I was had a business mentor who lived out in, I want to say, Montana, and Mormon. He was heavy in having multiple wives. And I didn't understand it. I can't understand it to this day, but I definitely think there was a shift in the church through testaments that really made that something that we do not do. Let's say that. Insanity.
Yeah.
Insanity. Shana.
Pastor West, what are your thoughts?
I think so. Here's what I think. One, I think so. I'm going to try to say this very succinctly as possible. I can get long-winded because I'm passionate about these conversations. But I would say I think we've tried to place an Eastern theological construct into Western theological construct. So we've tried to make some things fit culturally that just doesn't. And so I think if we take a real serious look at the Bible, I think it's hard. You really can't separate one's expression of faith from their cultural expression. And I think what we've tried to do in Western theological construct, we've tried to impose Western theological thought onto an Eastern practice, right? And so much of what we see in the New Testament, First Testament and the Second Testament, I don't call it old because none of God's revelation is old. And so the First Testament and the Second Testament, I think when we see in that, particularly the First Testament, we see a lot of cultural stuff. Like much of the laws and things that are being meted out or handed out, a lot of the prescriptions that are being handed down are really unique and specific to their particular culture. And I think what we've tried to do is apply concepts that were unique to their culture. Now, do I believe that we should have multiple wives? I believe the Bible speaks of that in not necessarily in glaring terms, but it's very suggestive on any number of occasions that a man should have one wife, right? Or that it's better to marry and to be faithful to a wife. And so you see terms that says a wife, your wife, the wife, as opposed to multiple and plural. And even Jesus speaks in terms of singular relationship. And so I think the Bible, while we see polygamy and husbands having multiple wives, I think in most instances you see it referring to or suggesting, especially in the Second Testament, that it is good for one to have one. And I also would say too, very quickly, that again, we're looking at a book that is incredibly patriarchal. Remember, women were property. They were cattle. They didn't have a voice, right? And so even the divorce laws were tailored around men, not necessarily women. Even that statement that we quote all of the time, when a man finds a wife finds a good thing. He finds a good thing, right? And so again, the Bible is written in very patriarchal language. We can even look at the way the Bible is looking at patriarchal language, the way that God is defined. God is a spirit, and that's what he is. But we very clearly define him as a him or a he, right? That's a whole nother conversation.
Right.
We're looking at a book that defines God in patriarchal terms, and it defines its relationships in patriarchal terms. And so while I believe that it is healthy to have one wife, I just want us to understand that much of what we read was taking place in a specific culture, and that was acceptable for their time.
Awesome.
Okay.
Heather, you have anything to say?
No, ma'am. Keep on going.
Okay, good. All right. I
You
thought you had
got your glasses on today. You look real studious.
Thank
You look
you.
real studious. She just want to look cute on lipstick.
Man.
All right. So the third question is, we know the Bible says a man, we were just talking about that, should find a wife. What do you say about women who choose to do online dating?
Listen,
Very interested in this one.
I don't know what Doc's gonna say, but I think it's cool. I think again, culture evolves every 2 to 4 years. The church evolves depending on the stat, 13 to 15. So the Christian community is always behind where culture is, and I'm not quite sure that's always healthy. And in most instances, it's proven not to be healthy. And so again, we're living in a very virtual world, a very tech world. And so these are just become some of the avenues and streams in which people are able to engage and relate, i.e. the way that we're conversating tonight. Mm-hmm. And so I think there are, as online dating has improved in terms of how they match up and all of some of the kind of stuff that they do in terms of to put people together. I think as those processes have gotten better, there are tons of stories where people have met one another through online dating, and they're married and have very successful families. And so I absolutely think it's a wonderful tool that, when used correctly, or be beneficial.
Awesome.
And I
Dr.
can't
Gentry?
I can't argue with that. I think it's a very high stat. I want to say it's 40 to 50% now of relationships are actually being found online.
Wow.
So it's a really high stat of the success rate. But I believe, and I talk about this anytime I talk about dating and dealing with Christianity, is God never really talked about dating. He talked about character. So when dating or courting someone new, online gives you the ability to really hear, listen to, and fill out their character previous to emotions coming together and emotions flaring. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I really believe that online dating, I love it. You know, I love the concept. Now I tried it at one point, and yeah, it wasn't that good, but I got captured like 2 or 3 times. It was crazy. But I think the notion of it, I think truthfully, anywhere that you can find, and you use the word soulmate later on, anywhere that you can understand a person, talk to a person, get clarity about who they are before you get tangled in the web of deceit or lies or emotion. And, you know, I think it's a great outlet for that. And right now, it's like you said, it's 2020. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're not out as much as we used to. It's not holler, let me get your number right on a piece of paper. I mean, it's definitely more accessible to get online, meet someone, talk to several different people, find out who you like, and then start a relationship with them. So I think it's outstanding.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That concept of that concept of let me go to church. If we're talking in a Christian context, let me go to church so I can find me a good man, or the brother saying, let me go to church so I can find me a good sister. While it can still happen, right? It's one of the multiple ways we can meet people, and if something happens, great. But I think we ought not to resign ourselves to that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One interesting thing, though, is the whole concept of courting. You know, in the Bible, I don't see any instances where people courted more so. What do you say to the whole concept of the courtship versus a man go finding a wife? Like, why do you think courting today is so important when the Bible mentioned really little bit or nothing about courting?
I would say, Doc, man, it's crazy because we counsel people, man, on relationships and all that kind of stuff. So, but I would say for me, I remember one of my former pastors said this to us. Him and his wife had a phenomenal relationship ministry. They traveled the country doing this stuff, and so it's really cool to sit under them at being on staff at this particular church years ago to kind of witness this up front and up close. But I remember they were talking about the Bible only has a few kind of relationships that it defines. Either you are a friend, either you are betrothed, which is essentially a process of courtship before you get married, you're married, or you're sister and brother, right? They only talk about a few relationships. And so I do think courtship is probably a better term for getting to know one another than dating. Dating, you typically kind of hang out, and this is probably semantical, but dating, when I try to define it, dating, you can just kind of test the water, test the milk with no real, accountability. But courtship suggests that there's an aim and a goal to your relationship. And so we're going to enter into this with the hope and the expectation that it ends in our marriage, and we can begin to start a family. So again, I said on the last time meeting, my youngest is 15, and that's our only girl. Have an 18-year-old, a 22-year-old, and a 23-year-old, about to be 24. And I never used the word dating. While at that age, I knew they were seeing young ladies or had some young ladies, they were calling their girlfriend. I never defined it that way. because I didn't want them to get into this space where if it didn't work, I'm on to the next. If it didn't work, I'm on to the next, where I can engage multiply. I would say that's a friend that you ought to respect, right? You ought to be clear on what your boundaries are. Y'all ought to be very clear if this is something that you all are entering into and expect for this to be just you and you one another. So for me, we're courting because there's an expected end. We're not just dating. And so even when my eldest son was in college and had a little lady friend that he was seeing for a couple of years, I never said it was his girlfriend. I never called it his girlfriend.
So what did you mention her? How did you refer to her?
His
Friend. Okay.
If I wanted to be sassy, his lady friend.
Lady friend.
And I would hope that, you know, my male friend, right, or my friend. We're not going to put that on there. You know, we're not going to put these
Titles
on something. You know, so I'm just very careful of that. But I do think courtship is probably a biblical model in entering a marriage relationship.
And I always like to reference Boaz. And people never really look at this. I guess people always see the story and glorify it because it's so amazing that he got a rich man. You know, everybody always looks at that. It's fantastic. But you have to realize, Boaz actually was researching her and studied her before he ever approached her. So he was getting to know who she was as a person before he already knew where he wanted to go with it. Like you said, it was courtship, friendship, courtship, marriage. So he already knew exactly what he wanted to do. He already knew. He was already lined up to be married when he went out. He talked to the people. He found out who she was. He understood her character. He watched her. He knew she was a hard worker. And then at that point, he approached her. So I think a lot of people have to look at how the relationship flowed inside of the Bible. Because you said there's very few instances in the Bible where they actually define a relationship or dating or courting, but they always showed examples of what it looked like. And that's why I always go back to the characteristics. I can't give you an example of the dating in the Bible, but I can always show you God said this, and this about a person's character, right? This is what you should be looking for. So with everything else you're looking for, it's the car. This is what God says you should be looking for. We find so many times that, and I call them the ABCs and DEFs. And I can rant about this forever, but the ABCs really should be important to a person, right? ABC, so that be loyalty, that be trust, that be hardworking. DEF should be appearance, car, finance, right? But what we do is we get attracted to the DEF instead of the ABC, so we find ourselves in a relationship that we were never supposed to be in the first place. So that's how we've been taught to get into a relationship, right? So once we get into the relationships, the ABCs no longer hold the position they should hold. So we're willing to take more of the pain, the frustration, the anger, the demeaning. Why? Because the DEFs are now first, and we don't want to look dumb because we've already accepted and told everybody, look how great they are, but not looking at their ABCs. And that's what we really should look at when we're dating. So that's how I really try to explain dating to people.
That's good. Can I add to that?
You can.
I also think, again, when we're looking through the lens of Scripture, we always have to look at context, right? In order for you to be able to define the context, you got to look at the pretext, what came before, so that you can understand better what happens afterwards, right? So context, you got to look at what came before, so you can look at what came after. That helps you understand the immediate, right? And so that's just kind of a hermeneutical process when you're studying and reading the Bible or whatever the case may be. But I would say, again, we can't separate culture from what we read in the Bible. So again, in that particular culture, and even in most Eastern cultures now, marriages are arranged, right? And so there were arranged marriage situations in much of the Bible. But even in the arranged marriage situations, there still was a period of courtship. Now, it probably looks very different than the way courtship would look in our context, in our culture. But if you use Mary and Joseph, and you know that got messy, and Jesus came out of that, right? But remember, there was a period of courtship, and they defined what the relationship looked like before they actually consummated it, right? So there were just things that they did along the way before they actually consummated the relationship on that night. So I think culture understanding culture and context is important, but I also say to Doc's point, and I said this, I got married, and when I got married, my wife was a few steps ahead of me. She was very clear the dating game was over. I'm looking to settle down and get married. She's a little bit older than I am. And so she already had an expected end that she was hoping for in this relationship. I'm thinking we just cool, we're doing our thing. This is a cool sister, educated, smart, we're doing our thing. No, she's already on the aisle, right? And so when I look at Boaz and Ruth, Oprah had already mapped this out. Here's where you need to go, right? This is my family, and technically he's supposed to be your kinsman redeemer. So I need you to show up and do this. Then I need you to come back and do this again, because the festival is taking place again. Remember, it was an agriculture culture, so they getting ready for the week. So they tossing the wheat and all that stuff on the wine press, and so that's a long process. And so dudes are tired, and while they're doing this stuff, they drinking as well and getting nice. And so she knew the position that Boaz was going to be in that night. So when he all nice, and he in a different kind of space, I need you to go rest at his feet.
Right.
Because to Doc's point, when his integrity is intact, he's going to do the right thing.
Right.
Oh, boom. Okay. This is my responsibility and my duty. Let me go ahead and make this happen. And so I say, as we look at relationships, the Bible really operates in patterns and principles. Follow the pattern, you'll see the principle.
Yes, sir.
I think, again, in terms of courting, that there is a way in which we engage before we say I do. There's a way in which we engage as we're getting to know one another. And so how do we take that principle from an ancient time and contemporize it so that it makes sense for us today?
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to skip and get into the soulmate question. So what do you say to the concept of soulmates? Since we're talking about courtship, we're talking about dating.
Absolutely. To me, it sounds good on fairy tales. I mean, I really believe that Disney has made soulmate, commercial. Everybody's a household thing, right? Everybody's now out looking for soulmates. But in reality, everybody wants their mate to be built like, Adam and Eve. You know what I mean? That was built from our rib, especially for me. No, it doesn't work like that. God gives us free will. If you sitting back waiting on a soulmate right now and you're watching this video, you're crazy. Keep waiting. You're never going to find it. But I think God gives us free will for a reason. You know what I mean? And you go back and you talk about principles. I did a study years ago on Jewish culture. And every time I read it was 617 principles. Back to back to back to back to back, 617. So you have to realize throughout their entire life, from school, their entire life till 18 years old, as they're going to school, they're being trained on 617 principles. So I've been trained on 617 principles my entire life. Treat a man the way they want to be treated. Treat a man the way you want to be treated. Treat a man you want to be leaded. Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Love God. This is a part of who I am as a person. Mm-hmm. This isn't something that I'm trying to become. And I think we have to really understand the principles, as you were talking about, the principles behind a relationship, the principles around a spouse or a spouse that you're looking to be with. You have to understand how you should act and react, right? We're always we're in this microwave society where we're looking for the absolute perfect match where nothing is going to go wrong at all. And it's impossible, right? I was watching, I think it was Steve Harvey, and they had women on there. The woman said she had like 50, 60 things on her list for a man. I said, that's the craziest thing. We can't find anybody because we make too much money. No, you can't find anybody because this doesn't even make sense. It's irrational. Soulmates, they're not there. Yeah, 26 years you've been married, right?
Yep, 26, brother.
Has it been easy whole 26?
No, bro. No.
Well, have there been some times where you felt like you were like, you know what? Let's just get this up. I'm out of here, right? You can't call it a soulmate, but that's 26 years of work, effort, energy, tweaking some things about yourself. She had to tweak some things about herself. So when you're saying I want a soulmate, really it's a fantasy. And quite truthfully, it's selfish.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
what you're truthfully saying is, I don't want to change anything about me. I want someone to take me as I am with all my flaws, and I don't want to change anything about me at all. And here, come get me. No, that's selfish. And I find it really immature for most people to believe that
Right.
that's what they want in their life. Because
Mhm.
you're really losing out on the people that should be in your life. If that makes sense.
Wow. Wow.
Wes,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Man, listen. I think again, it certainly sounds pretty on paper. Not sure if it's a reality. I think sometimes it's after you've been in it for a while that you can say this is my soulmate because you put the work in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think we need to get away from this idea that this is a fantasy. And all of a sudden we click. Now, has that happened? Yes. But should you kind of base how this thing unfolds for you? No. I think what is it? The Greek word for soul is the psyche,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so there are three parts, and I can't call those three parts. But according to, I think it's a Plato, there are three parts to the soul, right? Like one is an appetite, right? And I think oftentimes we associate that aspect of the soul with a soulmate, the appetite. I like the way they look. I like the way they smell. I like the touch. And so we get caught up in the very external idea of what it means to have a soulmate. And then when that stuff wears off, right, then we're left with what, right? This soulmate kind of a deal. And so again, when the love wears off, and it often does in a relationship, all of that honeymoon stuff, a few years in, the reality of bills and kids start coming, all touchy feely and tingly, man, that stuff goes out of the window. So
Quick.
right now, what are you holding on to when that stuff is gone, right? That's when the rubber meets the road in your relationship. Knowing that, sometimes when I look at her, man, I can't stop looking at her. Then sometimes when I'm looking at her, it's like, what am I looking at, right? And that's vice versa, right? And that's vice versa.
Right.
If we built our relationship on that, then both of us would have left a long time ago, right? But it has to be built on something more solid and something more stable than just this kind of gooey feeling that I get. And so I call it my soulmate. We're meant to be together. I think we got to do something better than saying that's what it means to be a soulmate. But I said all that to say, I do think that sometimes people find that one man and that's it. That does happen.
Right. Okay. Heather, I know you have some questions.
Yes, I do. What'd you say, Adrian?
I said that ooey gooey feeling.
All right, so I do have a
According to
couple
Pastor
questions.
West.
I do have a couple questions, right? Pastor, you said you talk to your kids, or you don't put a label on your kids when they're dating, right?
Yeah.
How do you educate Christians or your kids on when they're caught between Christianity and their desires for sex?
Yeah.
Or their sexual desires? How do you educate?
Well, I would say, and again, sex is beautiful because God made it. And so we're not running from sex, right? We're just trying to help them define when it's best appropriate, right? Let's put a context around this, right? And so,
Right.
that's what it is for me, because again, if you're just dating for this feeling and external, then sex becomes part of your motive. It becomes part of the way that you define the relationship. And then once the sex is either no longer good or you fall into some other areas, now the relationship is no more and you're on to the next. And I do believe, I think it's been cliched, but I do think it's powerful. And then I think Doc said it last time we met, is that there is an exchange that transpires when you enter into that kind of physicality with one another. And so every time you do, an aspect of who that person is walks with you. And so sometimes you're entering into the relationship that God has specifically and uniquely designed for you, and you can't give them the best of who you are because you are now haunted by this previous thing that you entered into wrong, right? And so now he's held captive, she's held captive because of some bad moves that you made in the past because you were leading with your flesh. And so again, I think helping our young people define that you can have healthy relationships with the opposite sex. If again, and I said opposite sex because I'm talking a heterosexual spectrum. So again, even if that's same sex for you, and that's probably a whole other conversation, but whoever that mate is for you, how do you have healthy relationships just healthy relationships without sex being the motive, right? And I think, again, if you kind of define what that is for you going up front, not that you won't fall right into that, we're designed to be with sexual beings, but I think if you put some boundaries and some parameters and establish, here's how we're going to operate in a relationship, I think it can happen. But empowering our young people with some terminology and helping them to define boundaries, I think is important.
Absolutely.
What do you think, Adrian? Oh, you agree?
No, I think he's 100% on. I think more so. I think of my daughter. My daughter just turned 16, and she's wearing halter tops. I just can't get that out of my head. She's wearing halter tops.
Me either,
But
bro.
but I remember when we first had the conversation about a boyfriend. And it's so interesting because my daughter actually came to me with definitions, right? Like, so of dating, courting, boyfriend. Like, she came with definitions. It was the craziest. And in my mind, I'm screaming, but I'm trying to keep a cool face. But I remember speaking with her, and I've always said from when I was a child, I said I will be 100% honest with my children when it comes to anything of this nature. You know, I will be open. I will be honest. I'm going to tell you, I told her everything that a boy would say to get in her pants, and then I affirmed her. And I believe that's what we really have to choose, be completely honest and open with our children and keep affirming them, letting them know when a woman is promiscuous as a child, there's an insecurity there. When a man is, promiscuous and from one woman to a next woman, there's an insecurity there. So for me, it was always affirm, 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 affirm. You're the absolute best. You're smart. You're intelligent. You're beautiful. I want her to hear it from me more than I wanted her to hear it from everyone else, because I understood that I was that guy as a teenager. Yep. Your parents were strict. I'm on you because I already know what time it was back then. I already know what time it was back then. But I always knew for my daughter, and I think for teens in general, we have to be more open. Anytime that we make it taboo, it's going to be something that people run to. I think of gun control. So my son, he watches guns on TV. He thinks they were fun to play with and everything else. I said, okay, come on, let's go to the gun range. So I took him to the gun range, and once he heard the first gun go off, he never wanted to touch a gun again. But I wanted to expose him to it in a healthy way where I can control it and let him understand, you can come back to me, son, to talk about anything. My daughter, I want her to understand it. You can come back to me and talk about anything, because that was the most awkward conversation I've ever had in my life, right? But I think we have to be, instead of being judgmental, instead of beating them down, tearing them down, making them fearful of everything, because now you've closed the door. So you've closed the door for them. They won't come back to tell you anything. And now they're taking the advice from other people who don't know what's going on. So I think as Christians, I think that's a part of really educating and molding children, is to be honest in your experience and allowing and having that calm ear. And I think that's why God says a wise man is slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to anger. Why? You're angry at all times and tearing them down. They're not coming back to speak with you. Like, they're not. And so now you have a child out there that's listening to other dumb people and screwing up, some of them screwing up their lives, other them promiscuous. Some of them, they're being baited in. Why? Because they have so many insecurities. And we're supposed to be, as adults, the people who affirm them and pick them up, lift them up, and educate.
No said, bro. Well, I would say, oh man, dude, that's a mouthful. I got me some good notes on that, bro. But I would say, I think, date your daughter. If we're talking about daughters, date your daughter. Let her experience what it's like when a man respects and honors her. What it looks like when a man operates with chivalry and cares for her. What it looks like when a man is giving her attention, genuine attention. And so date her. And so when that dude comes by looking real good and looking real smooth with game and all that, she can say, I heard that. That ain't new. My dad already told me that. Already got that. Yeah, dad already said that. What else you got? You know, right. So I don't want her to be swept off her feet by some substanceless conversation because she, to Doc's point, she wasn't affirmed.
Right.
And yeah, I always tell brothers, man, date your daughter. Let her do the first dude.
So, Pastor, so what if the father's not in the home? How does the mom take care of that part?
Wow. Whew, that's a great question. I would say, and I've said this in the past, and I try to say it more diplomatically now, but I've said it in a very raw and probably untamed way in the past, that, yo, listen, whoever that dude was that's in your life, he ain't here no more. And you're giving a license and sanction for your daughter to engage in with the same kind of dude. And so take lessons from a failed relationship to protect your daughter. And all of us parent differently, and we don't want to run our children away, but you have to safeguard and protect your children from some of the same bad mistakes that you made as it pertains to the relationship. And I would especially say, I see this happen more, and not exclusively, but typically you'll see male mothers being really hard on their daughters, right? Because you want her to succeed, you want her to be better than you are, and you don't want her to make the same mistakes you did, and so you're a little extra hard. But Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu talks about this in his book, Confronting Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. He said how daughters are raised to be mothers. They're raised to know how to take care of a house and do all of these things, while sons allowed to stay out late,
right,
hang out a little bit, may not have to do the dishes. And so he's just raised with a lot of liberty and freedom, right? And so now you're a single mother raising your son, and you're allowing him to engage in the same kind of behavior that allowed you to become single. And so you're on the phone with your girlfriend talking, girl, shoot, all these girls call and heated, and you're almost glorifying it. But you're on the phone talking as a single woman because some dude put you in that same position. Right. And so instead of checking that and say, yo, this is not an appropriate way to engage and treat a young lady. I am not comfortable with you running around and having all of these young ladies call. That's going to stop. All of that kind of stuff. And so instead of having some conversation about respect and honor, we almost give a license to it. And so I think, how do we correct behavior that, got us in a place that broke our heart?
Right. Wow. That's good. All right. So my other question is, right, are certain sexual acts and items too worldly within a marriage?
Hey, Doc, the Bible says that I'm talking in context of marriage, that the marriage bed is
undefiled.
Enjoy yourself.
World out there, undefiled.
Operative. So for
okay.
Me,
all right.
No.
All right. Question answered. All right. So my last question is, how would I know, or how would a person know when they are in love, or is it lust, according to the Bible?
Yeesh.
Yeesh.
Oh, God. I'm gonna let the doctor handle this.
That's strong. Hold on. I'm trying to get my thoughts together.
This one.
I'm actually in the process of writing a book, and it's called The 6 A's of Intimacy. And I began to do the research and talking to different couples. And one of the things that I've learned more than anything else is these couples who are truthfully intimate deal in a best friend relationship. It's not this ooey gooey feeling. It's not this ooey gooey feeling that Pastor said. But I think what we have to first understand is if it's love is defined the word love. So I talk about inside of the book the anatomy of a definition, because what I figured out is most people don't understand definitions. They know where to put things. They know where to put words in sentences. And we've never really defined the word. So love is a completely arbitrary word because no one ever taught us the definition of the word. We only learned the definition based off of what other people showed us. So I say this and a lot of people get mad, and you have to hear me through. A man who beats a woman doesn't mean that man doesn't love her. It means that's the way he's learned how to love, which is toxic. And many times people are in relationships and they've only seen love from a toxic place. So you have to centralize what love is and define it for yourself. So for me, since I listen to the Bible, I only subscribe to one sort of love, right? Love is patient. Love is kind. Love holds no wrongdoing. I went through that scripture and I went through it. I posted on my wall and I had to read it. I had to read it. I had to read it. Why? Because my whole life I had seen toxic love and I'd never seen a healthy relationship. So when I ask people, are they in love? Does love look like how it's written in the Bible? One, is this a person that accepts you for who you are, but also grows you? Because the people inside of us should grow us. What it says, iron sharpens iron, right? certain characteristics in the Bible that people just don't pick up on. So a helpmate, are they helping you move forward? So this love has to be taken out of the context of emotion altogether, but it has to be placed in, okay, I can certainly define this by love. This is healthy. This is what it should look like. And lust is only emotion, right? Because that's the feeling that I feel inside of my pants, inside of my heart, inside of my mind. It's a feeling. Mm-hmm. That's all it is. And it's a very thin line, because we have some good sex. I'm going to tell you right now, it feels like love to most people.
Yeah.
But does it have the components of the love verse?
Right.
Is that a person that you can move forward with? Is that a person that's helping your trajectory, or growing into? Can you grow into your trajectory with that person, where you believe God has you going? And if it's not that person, it's not love. What you're dealing with now is lust, or you're dealing with a broken attachment and needing to be attached to someone else.
Wow. Wow. I'm looking at Ephesians 5:25, and I think we misrepresent this scripture, and further submit to one another. Let me just go ahead and get that out of the way, because lust really is driven by our flesh. It's driven by a feeling. It's driven by a moment with no context of longevity or often respect of the other person. It is, what can I get out of this for myself? But in Ephesians 5, it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. For wives, this means submit, right? And we misrepresented that. But for wives, it means submit to your husbands as the Lord. And again, remember, we talked about cultural context. But for husbands, husband is the head, as a wife as Christ as a wife as Christ is the head of the church. But the part that I really like is when it says, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her, right? And so how do we demonstrate love? I think love is the highest level of understanding. Again, I think when Jesus was on the cross, he said, Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do, right? That is a high level of understanding. That is a high level of forgiveness. That is a high level of grace. And love's direction is always outward, right? And so I think when you give yourself completely and wholeheartedly to someone else, again, I think a relationship's best thrive when I'm not looking to be satisfied. I'm looking to see what I can give. I'm most satisfied in my relationship when I give, right? Again, if you come to a relationship half, you got to come to a relationship as whole as possible. And so when I enter into a relationship whole, I'm looking for what I can give, because part of my desire is to please and satisfy you, right? But if you come to a relationship looking for what you can get, then typically it was shaped and built around lust. And when you can't get what you can get no more, then we start having problems. But if I come and enter into a relationship where my whole focus is to give, as Christ gave himself for us, then if that's the case, then I ain't gonna never be dissatisfied. Right? I'm always ready to give. And so I think understanding love and lust, what are you giving as opposed to what you're always trying to get?
You know what's funny? It was crazy. I didn't even realize this was over here. I went through this course called Every Man a Warrior, and we had a couple of verses and things we had to learn verbatim. And it says, it is my privilege to show my love for Jesus by caring for my wife, to love her, show her honor, and to try to understand her and give up my life and my rights for her. So right in line with understanding. I think that's what I say. Intimacy, intimacy. Intimacy.
I like that.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you, Renee. Back to you, though. I love that.
Well, thank you guys so much. I don't know if anyone has any final thoughts. We'll be wrapping up, but I really did appreciate, again, this conversation. Very engaging, very enlightening, and we hope we can do this again with some other topic, because I think, it was really good, and I really appreciate you guys' time. Don't take it for granted.
I appreciate
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for extending an opportunity to talk about some things that are often taboo in the church and in Christian circles. Thank you for moving the conversation from this ethereal space down on the ground so that we can touch it. so that we can be better prepared and outfitted for how we engage relationally with other people, and for those who we get a privilege to parent and to mentor, we can provide good insight and wisdom for them. And I think these kind of platforms are so necessary, because we're having them in these little private corners and nobody ever gets to hear it. And so put it in a place where it's public, and now people get an opportunity to chop it up. You've now given groups of people who otherwise wouldn't have this conversation, you've sanctioned and given them a license to be able to do so. So kudos to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
You guys. Adrian, you good?
Huh?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you all. Good to see you guys.
Talk to you soon.
No doubt.
All right.